Hello, a very late evening and a good morning to all those listening in, and welcome to Axiom Flux News with myself, PJ, covering the 13th of March 2015 flux of the news, with the first article I've got, which is from the 21st Century Wire, and this is regarding Iceland as they announce we're out of the EU. 21st Century Wire says, looks like the Vikings will not be pitching a tent in Brussels after all. Two fundamental key points here. It's not in line with the policies of the ruling government to accept everything that the last government was willing to accept. If in the future Iceland decides to join the EU, this will be decided only by a referendum. Any chance that one of the European members would be so ballsy as to actually demand one of those old-fashioned referendums? This one was on the cards for quite some time. There's an image there saying no EU bankers, we're out of it. Iceland have got no debt, zero debt. Zero EU bankers too. That's from past few days and today. Iceland has dropped its bid to join the European Union. The Foreign Ministry in Reykjavik, whatever that says. The announcement follows pledges made by the country's Eurosceptic government since winning the 2013 election. Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson, the Icelandic Foreign Minister, said in a statement that he had informed Latvia, the current EU President, and the European Commission that his centre-right government had decided to withdraw its application, which was submitted 6 years ago. The EU and Iceland have discussed the country's position on the status of its bid to join the European Union. The statement reads, "The government does not intend to resume preparing for EU membership." Prime Minister Sigmundur Davíð Gunnlaugsson talked of formally withdrawing the bid in January. Participating in EU talks isn't really valid anymore, he said at the time, both due to changes in the European Union and because it's not in line with the policies of the ruling government to accept everything that the last government was willing to accept. And because of that, we're back at square one. Iceland applied for EU membership in July 2009 at a time when the global economic crisis was unravelling. By February 2010, the European Commission produced a favourable answer and accession negotiations began in July that same year. The negotiations came to a stalemate in April 2013 when the election in Iceland was won by the centrist Progress Party and the Conservative Independence Party. When Progress Party's Gunnlaugsson became Prime Minister, he froze negotiations with the EU in May of 2013. One of the major issues stalling an agreement was fish catch quotas insisted on by Brussels, something the Icelandic fishing industry would never have agreed to. A small island nation with a population of 325,000 is and will still be a member of the European Economic Area, the European Free Trade Association, the Schengen Area, and is an EU partner promoting cooperation in Northern Europe, meaning it gets many of the advantages of being a full member without many of the negative aspects of centralised EU laws and planning. So does it sound like there's much chance of Iceland getting the EU police with the sounds of things, but you can never be too sure. If in the future Iceland decides to join the EU, this will be decided only by a referendum. Continuing story at RT, for those want to look into this more. You should pretty be well aware of what this article is speaking about, really, if you're well up on the alternative news and whatnot. Next article is from RT. This is a huge fire at a school near London. Residents report an explosion. This is earlier on today, on the 13th of March. A huge fire has swept a school in Surrey, south of London, following reports of an explosion with around 40 firefighters at the scene tackling the blaze. Ambulances and helicopter are at the scene. Police confirmed that all individuals had been accounted for. Surrey reported the clouds of black smoke could be seen throughout Weybridge. Chris Marchington told the paper he was in his back garden with his son when he heard the explosion. It was the beginning of a smallish fire at that point on the roof of the new build that's happening at St George's School, he said. It's now a major fire. He added that he had heard very nasty bangs, which he described as really grim, with a nasty smell. Marchington reported that small flakes of ash and charcoal were drifting down over streets near the school. Neil Davison, General Manager of Weybridge Health Club, Heath Club, Health, could be Heath, I'm not sure, in Walton Lane near the site, told the website the fire was absolutely huge. Some images there. Seems to be a bit later on in the stages of the fire. There was a small explosion, big enough for us to hear, and there were flames on the roof of the new building, he said. Things then just escalated really quickly, he said. The Surrey Fire and Rescue spokesman said, "We were called to a fire in Thames Street, Weybridge at 12:37 p.m. and have sent 8 fire engines, a number of specialist vehicles, and around 40 firefighters to the scene." And that actually surprises me with the amount of fire stations that are being closed down. Probably not affecting the area just yet, but that's to come. We can confirm the exact location of the fire is a construction site on the premises of St George's School in Thames Street, Weybridge, and everyone at this scene has been accounted for. So that's the little brief notification on a fire at a school in London, or near London. Moving on to my next one. Been a busy day for the Hillsborough inquest as the police chief denies there was a cover-up after the tragedy. David Duckenfield has admitted he failed to authorise the opening of a gate at the Leppings Lane end of Sheffield's Hillsborough ground that led to the crush. I'll show you his face there while I read this. No cover-up. Duckenfield denies there was a cover-up. The match commander on the day of the Hillsborough disaster has denied there had been a cover-up. David Duckenfield said there was no conspiracy to hide the truth about senior officers' failings. The inquest heard in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy that he failed to authorise the opening of a gate at the Leppings Lane end of Sheffield's Hillsborough ground that led to the crush. He also admitted his actions were not good enough on the day and his oversight led to the deaths of 96 fans. A coroner, Sir John Goldring, asked Mr. Duckenfield, "You are saying, are you, that a reasonably competent match commander would have foreseen where fans should go?" Mr. Duckenfield said, "Yes." The coroner asked, "You are saying that a reasonably competent match commander would have closed the tunnel?" To which Mr. Duckenfield agreed. The coroner then asked, "Does it therefore follow, tell me, if I have misunderstood, that on the day you did not act as a reasonably competent match commander?" Mr. Duckenfield answered, "Yes." Rajiv Menon, a QC, Queen's Counsel, representing the families of the 75 Hillsborough victims, put it to Mr. Duckenfield that there had been a false narrative after the disaster which sought to blame Liverpool fans. After pausing to consider his answer, Mr. Duckenfield, who admitted to being a Freemason but denied it had helped his promotion to Chief Superintendent, replied, "I disagree. There was no conspiracy as far as I am concerned." I don't think I was involved in any cover-up whatsoever. He doesn't think he was. My main objective was a rescue operation and to do the very best I could for all concerned. It was chaotic, hectic, and stressful. Yeah, for these people, not for him. Disaster crowds of fans waiting to get into the grounds before the Hillsborough disaster. But we are not talking about normal circumstances, we are talking about a massive tragedy and me doing my very best under very difficult circumstances. There were audible groans from relatives of the 96 when Mr. Duckenfield said he suffered post-traumatic stress disorder after the disaster. Mr. Menon continued, "Do you accept these mistakes led to overcrowding, crushing, injury and deaths in the central pens?" Mr. Duckenfield replied, "Today, sir, 26 years on, and with hindsight, the mistakes I made that day were a contributory factor. I did my best under very trying circumstances. Sadly, my best was not good enough." Hours after the match, he was called into the office of the then Chief Constable of South Yorkshire, Peter Wright, who was not best pleased about the day's events. Mr. Duckenfield added, "I just remember having related my story to him and being dismissed like a schoolboy out of the headmaster's office." There's an image there. Mr. Menon asked Mr. Duckenfield, "You breached your duty of care to ensure the safety of the fans, didn't you?" Mr. Duckenfield replied, "Overall, sir, yes." Mr. Menon said, "Your negligence caused the disaster and the deaths of 96 Liverpool fans, didn't it?" Mr. Duckenfield said he would not use the word negligence, and when asked what word he would use, he said mistake, oversight. Mr. Menon asked, "Why has it taken you nearly 26 years to come clean and admit at long last that you made critical mistakes that contributed to the disaster and the deaths of the 96 Liverpool fans who died?" Mr. Duckenfield said, "I ask for no pity, I ask for no sympathy, because my difficulties do not compare with those of the families. But I was possibly in denial, and I never found a venue or an opportunity where I could meet with someone and speak to them honestly and openly and ensure that my thoughts and my feelings would be reported fairly. And this court gave me the opportunity to sit here and apologise fully for the first time without fear of anybody misrepresenting what I was saying." The inquest continues. Probably will do for many, many, many years to come. Got a little video. It's 7 minutes. Yeah, I should play this one, I think. I can at least try to. Is it playing? Is it not? It's probably one of these ones that refuse to play. Get a little refresh. Come on, play the video. Unfortunately, it won't seem to play. I'm not sure why that is. It might be a fault with the mirror, I think. May try and come back to that. Okay, the officials deny report that EU blocked a nuclear fuel deal. In my next article, employees work in the operations centre of the Pax nuclear power plant reactor unit number 4 in Pax, 120 km, 75 miles east of Budapest. Russian, Hungarian and EU officials on Friday denied a Financial Times report that claimed that the EU blocked a multi-billion deal under which Hungary is to buy nuclear fuel rods from Russia for its Pax nuclear power plant. Russian nuclear engineers are to build 2 new reactors with a combined capacity of 1,200 megawatts at Hungary's only nuclear power plant, which currently has 4 reactors. The deal, signed last year, involves a €10 billion loan that Moscow offered to Budapest on condition that the money would pay for the equipment. The new reactors would have to be loaded with Russian-made fuel rods, which is a matter of safety for the new reactors. However, EU's nuclear fuel purchasing agency, Euratom, is opposing the exclusive deal. The Financial Times reported Thursday that the European Commission last week secretly backed Euratom's decision to block the deal. Hungarian government spokesman Zoltán Kovács said the FT report was untrue and that Budapest would demand that the newspaper publish a retraction. Russian nuclear agency Rosatom said it had nothing to add to Kovács' words and that as far as it knew, the deal was approved by the European Commission. Later, European Commission spokesperson Anna-Kaisa Ikonen confirmed that the EU was not blocking the deal. Hungary is among EU members opposing Brussels' drive to break ties with Russia over the ongoing Ukrainian crisis. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is a vocal opponent of EU sanctions against Moscow, which have led to a trade war between Russia and Europe. He also criticised the EU for derailing the South Stream pipeline project, which would route Russian natural gas to Europe through Bulgaria, Serbia and Hungary, providing extra energy security to Eastern Europe. Orban maintains his maverick position towards EU anti-Russian policies, which he views as harmful for Europe and imposed under pressure from Washington. Critics accuse him of authoritarian trends, with hawkish US Senator John McCain going as far as calling him a neo-fascist dictator. Amid the criticism both at home and abroad, the PM's Fidesz party won last year's general election with a landslide victory, receiving almost 40% of votes. Could be Fidesz party. I'm not actually well up on that one, to be honest. So there you go on that one. This is quite a sad story, really. What I've got next coming up. A tragic schoolgirl found hanged had carved the words ruin, fat and hate into her body. Alicia McLaughlin, 16, had struggled with her mental health and had a history of self-harming, an inquest has heard. This is problems with Alicia's sister also attempted to take her own life, a court has heard. A tragic schoolgirl found hanged in her bedroom had carved the words ruin, fat and hate into her body. An inquest has heard. Alicia McLaughlin, 16, was a promising student tipped for straight A's in her GCSEs, but had a history of mental health problems, a court was told. The teenager, who also used the surname Rothwell, was removed from her parents' care due to their drug addiction and initially lived with her great-aunt Carol Carefoot, Coroner's Court in Bolton heard. Miss Carefoot told the hearing she first saw some surface scratches on Alicia's arms in November 2012, after she returned to the house for a short stint in foster care. There were surface scratches, but when I talked about it, she ran off upstairs and didn't want to discuss it. She said it was the only time I noticed self-harm. I found her to be a good child. She had some issues, and sadly they led to the breakdown of our placement, but she was a good child. She had a lot of friends and was beautiful inside and out. Alicia's behaviour began to change from around the age of 14, when her biological sister Carly got in touch through Facebook and asked to meet, the court heard. The pair grew closer and began having contact with their biological mother, Gaynor Rothwell. As Alicia's behaviour deteriorated, she was moved into foster care in November 2012. From March 2013, Alicia began running away from home for days at a time and would often be found with Carly, who is now 19. At one point, the pair staged a rooftop protest at a care centre, at one point in a plea to be housed closer together. In June 2013, Carly took an overdose of tablets while in Alicia's bedroom, and she had to be taken to hospital. The following day, Alicia also took an overdose at home, the court heard. She had to be taken to hospital by ambulance, where she remained for 2 days but refused mental health treatment. Giving evidence, the teenager's foster mother, Beverly Sharple, said, "They tried to see her again, but she said she wouldn't be coming again. We had concerns and we're trying to encourage it to work, but you can't force that." Although some of her self-harming wounds were potentially years old, neither Alicia's foster mother nor social worker noticed them, or knew she was inflicting injury on herself. Events began to reach the climax on April the 2nd of last year. Mrs. Sharple said the school had left me a message and the social workers rang me and said they were on their way to the house. They said she had cut herself at a school. I presumed she had done something at school but was oblivious until I pulled up the social worker. She said she had cut her arm self-harming. I went to ask if I could look at her arm, and she said, "What for?" She said she didn't want to go to hospital. I phoned the paramedics and they suggested we go. She wasn't happy about going. She was assessed in A&E, then sent to another bit of hospital, and the nurse also asked if she wanted to speak to someone while she was there. Surprisingly, she said yes, which is a massive step because she had refused up until then. A man from the RAID team, a mental health worker, which is the RAID, took her to a room and she was in there for 1 hour and 10 minutes and I wasn't allowed in. He said she wouldn't engage. She said it was a waste of time and he said I was having a bad day. Before she went to sleep, she was really upset. I asked what she was crying for and she said, "I'm sorry. You have been in the hospital with me for 5.5 hours. I'm a pain in the bum." I said, "Yes, but you're my pain in the bum." Miss Sharples left the house the following day and returned at around 2 p.m. after running some errands. When she went upstairs to check on Alicia some time later, she found her body. Pathologist Dr. Charles Wilson, who examined Alicia's body, said she had a multitude of old scars around her left forearm and a number of scars on her front and side and left thigh. Within the scarring, these were some lines which were organised to spell words. On her left thigh were the words ruin and fat. The cuts would have taken at least a couple of months to reach the stage I saw. They could have been years old. A wound to her upper arm spelled the word hate. The more recent injuries would be very obvious. You would see them from the other side of the room. All her recent injuries were compatible with being 24 hours old. I would expect anybody that had close contact with her to notice them. The inquest, expected to last 4 days, is continuing. There you go. And the one, really too sure the reasons why, but doesn't sound like she had the best start or best support. Maybe many people, many other organisations could have done a lot better. Was this man murdered for exposing a London paedophile ring? This latest report sheds light on one of London's most brutal and still unsolved crimes, now linked to an organised paedophile ring run out of local government offices. A whistleblower, Lambeth housing officer Bulick Forsyth, had information about an organised government-related paedophile ring in South London. More news from Sky News, if you want to look further into this. Police investigating Westminster-linked child abuse are examining whether a man was murdered because he was about to expose a paedophile ring operating within a London council. Sky News has obtained details of an internal investigation documenting sexual assaults and abuse carried out by officers within Lambeth Council in the 1990s. The unpublished report reveals claims from those within the council that Bulick Forsyth, a manager in the housing department whose murder sparked a nationwide appeal in 1993, may have discovered council property was being used to carry out abuse. That abuse involved senior figures in Lambeth who were using council premises for the rape of women and children, according to the report's remarkable findings. They used the basement of Lambeth's housing headquarters, the report says, because sexual assault could be performed without fear of interruption by other staff. A senior staff member is accused of watching material with sadistic, bestial and paedophile themes, which may have been home produced by staff of people with whom they associated. One female staff member was subject to a rape on council premises of horrendous proportions, such that she was still suffering from serious injuries 1 month on. She described being raped alongside children and animals by senior figures in the council. Although the report, which was prompted by alleged breaches of the council's equal opportunities policy, recommends a criminal investigation, its findings were never formally investigated by the police at the time. Instead, the perpetrators within the council were dismissed from their positions. The report has never before been made public. It also reveals that colleagues of Bulick Forsyth, whose family have long believed he was murdered to prevent him from blowing the whistle on events at Lambeth, also feared he'd been killed as part of a cover-up. The image there is Bulick's daughter, and she said she was shocked by the report. The murder of Bulick Forsyth was seen by some witnesses as a possible outcome for anyone who strayed too far in their investigation or for those who asked too many questions, the report says. The panel heard evidence about Bulick Forsyth whilst he was working in a social services visiting Hambrook House and speaking to a colleague and telling her that he was going to spill the beans. 3 days later, he was killed, the report says. Sky News showed the report to Kiddis Forsyth, 21, the daughter of Bulick Forsyth, who was born 3 months after his murder. She said, "Some of the stuff that's in here, I honestly can't believe happened. I was very shocked. It's really clear the fear that operated in the council. It seems from the report my father felt that fear." She went on adding, he was scared that if he moved jobs, people in power could still get to him. There you go. Another story to add to the list of other stories of potential murders to cover up those whistleblowers that speak out to expose paedophile rings. My next one is why are Aussie students still struggling to make ends meet? Being a student is a special time in your life. You're old enough to be responsible for yourself, but still young enough to not have too many responsibilities, which means you're old enough to have to pay for yourself, but too young to be earning decent money. If you're a student in a capital city, especially in Melbourne or Sydney, and you're living away from the family home, it can be quite hard to make ends meet. There are horror stories of students subsisting on canned tuna or couch surfing on their friends' couches, which would officially make them homeless. But there are also the middle of the road scenarios, typical of many students. On the surface, they don't seem to have it too tough. They go out to eat some nights, they live close to school, and they're not begging for their dinner. But the hand-to-mouth nature of how so many students' lives should give Australia pause about how the next generation will be able to save for their future, or how they will buy a home as property prices continue to climb and an affordability crisis rains down. Take Sasha, surname withheld, for example, who is in her early 20s and studying in Melbourne. Her family lives in Queensland, so she doesn't have the luxury of saving money by bunking in with her parental units. Her weekly expenses are rent in a share house in an inner city suburb, $200 Australian dollars. Groceries for the week, $60. Eating out and entertainment is $120. A car repayment, $70. Lay-by payments for flights for upcoming trip, $50. Bills for gas, water and electricity and the internet is $40, which brings it to a total of $540 Australian a week. On top of that, there was also random expenses such as textbooks twice a year that cost hundreds of dollars, software subscriptions necessary for a course, car registration insurance, and expenses you can't predict such as car repairs. Sasha said she usually earns between $550 a week to $700 a week from her bar job. The higher end of that scale is if she's lucky enough to pick up a weekend or public holiday shift which pays penalty rates. For her, getting paid penalty rates is the only time she's able to put some money aside for future projects. Sasha also receives payments from Centrelink. The maximum payable amount to a student over 18 but under 25 living away from home is $426.80 a fortnight, which isn't even half of what Sasha's weekly expenses. That Centrelink payment also starts to reduce by 50% if you earn more than $214 a week. Essentially, you can't earn even close to a living wage and still be supplemented by youth allowance. To receive the full payment and still earn less than the reduction threshold equates to an income of $427 a week. Not really enough to live on in a capital city if you have to pay rent, and you can completely forget about saving any money. Which is why, like many students, Sasha has had or is looking for a cash-in-hand job. She said, Centrelink payment levels and conditions is not realistic in Melbourne or Sydney, which is why everyone cheats the system. There's no way I would be able to survive on that. A lot of my friends look for jobs that are in cash in hand. When you work those jobs, you don't get penalty rates or the workplace protections if anything happens, but you just accept it and do what you have to do to survive. While it's untrue that everyone has the kind of expenses uni students have, most adults are not held back by not being able to work reasonable hours because of study commitments. There are students in demanding courses who have contact hours that are the equivalent of full-time work, while even those who may only have 10 hours of class time can end up with timetables that rule out the bulk of their week for anything else. And because uni students are young people who have little experience or qualifications for industries that pay a decent wage, they have to work a lot of hours in low-paying jobs to earn enough to survive on. This is also not taking into account unpaid internships that many students do. This can have the consequence of spending so much time working to live that their studies may end up suffering. Studies that are supposed to prepare students for their future careers, and for which they're taking on tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Sasha is classed as most mornings, so can only work at night or on the weekend. Her current job sees her working from the afternoon up until 10 p.m, about 5 times a week, but this means she'll get home from work with almost no time to study, and she had to get up early the next day to be back in class. She concedes that she's lucky to have her mum to rely on, whereas many students don't. Sasha's mum pays her mobile phone bill, and they're currently talking about her mum paying for part of her rent to ease the load. As much as we don't have any money and you struggle, you have enough to have a decent life, she said. I still have some money for socialising, but that's part of being young and having those experiences. Even if that means when there's a tight week, you eat a lot of noodles and Weetabix. Marcus Sinnenberg from the Bendigo Student Association said many students are finding it hard to juggle work and school. He also said that more students are currently more focused on savings for short-term goals, such as end-of-year holidays, than on long-term plans, such as home ownership. Quite a lot of noodles. The MeBank research found that only 27% of students keep records of their monthly expenses, while 54% of students don't consistently set a budget. The idea is that if you don't even know how much you're spending, you can't monitor your expenses, let alone put in place measures to keep it under control. The MeBank Chief Executive Jamie McPhee said students need to learn to develop a money plan and prioritise spending. The first step is to understand the difference between needs and wants. For example, items such as food, petrol, computers and textbooks are non-negotiable, whereas new jeans and concert tickets are discretionary items that should be carefully considered and ideally saved for. Being truthful about spending habits will help you start saving and stay out of debt. Calculating your monthly expenses will give you a clearer picture on how much discretionary income you have left to spend or save, and will also guide you on how much should be spent on particular items. So don't worry if you can't afford a pair of jeans. Just walk in your pants. Just go to your university in your knickers or whatever it is, and study. It's all good. My next article, which brings me on to my final one. This is from the February the 20th of 2015 report by Charlotte Malone. It's an old one, but it's Osborne faces calls to close Mayfair Tax loophole. Chancellor George Osborne is facing increasing pressure to close the Mayfair Tax loophole after a report found that private equity bosses are using it to cut their tax bills. The group behind the report is called the loophole Government-Sponsored Tax Avoidance. The report from campaign group 38 Degrees suggests that executives at private equity firms are avoiding paying up to £700 million a year in taxes by lowering their tax rate. An arrangement between HM Revenue and customers and the British Venture Capital Association means that profits made at investment firms called carried interest are treated as personal investments. This means the profits are taxed at a 28% rate, and in some cases 10%, rather than the usual 40 or 45%. According to 38 Degrees, private equity fund managers can earn between 1.2 million to 15 million in a good year, yet avoid paying national insurance contributions and pay a lower tax rate than those on incomes far below theirs. The paper also reveals 16 private equity bosses are major donors of the Conservative Party, giving more than 7 million over the last 7 years. David Babs, an executive director at 28 Degrees, said this Mayfair tax loophole is government-sponsored tax avoidance on a breathtaking scale. Money which should be funding the NHS is going to millionaire fund managers instead. The rest of us, paying our fair shares, to keep the country going. Why should multi-millionaire financiers be treated any different or be treated differently? He added in his last budget before the election, George Osborne wants to convince the country that he's on the side of hard-working families on average incomes. He wants us to take him seriously. He's got to close the Mayfair Tax loophole first. In response to the report, Tim Hames, Director General of the BBCA, has said that the claims of revenues lost in the reports do not match reality, and noted that there are similar arrangements were in place in many other countries. You can have a further read on that, but coming to this article, for those that are watching this, Saturday the 14th of March, the 38 Degrees members are going to be up and down the UK. I've just brought this one to your attention because it's the one I'll be going to. So it's from the hours of 11 AM to 1 PM. The Peace Gardens. This is along Pinston Street near the Winter Garden and within walking distance of the Millennium Galleries. What marked there. So do attend this for those that are in this area. And if you're not in Sheffield, go to 38 Degrees, type in the Stop the Mayfair Tax loophole, and you'll find out the list of other areas up and down the country where you can get out, get engaged, and make these rich people pay the tax. So that's my roundup today of my Flux news. I don't know if there's any comments from yourself, Black Hole. If there's no comments, I will try and play that other video now, which I don't think it will play, but yeah, another go here. Try and go back to that video on the Hillsborough disaster. Okay, that's not the one. This is the one. Just change my browser to see if it is the browser that's causing it not to play. But if not, no, even this one's not playing it, so unfortunately I can't show you that video. But I'm sure if you look it in or put it in on YouTube, you'll find many more, which is probably your best bet really, because there's quite some good documentaries out there on the Hillsborough disaster over the years where people have been uploading certain videos and stuff. So do look into that. No, it's definitely not. In fact, it is playing. It does seem to be playing now. No, it's not having it. Alright guys, gonna leave it there. Thank you for watching the Flux. Do drop an email if you want to jump on board. And until tomorrow, I'll say goodbye for now. And I will be bringing a report going to the event tomorrow, which I've just showed you about the Mayfair Tax loophole. So I will be doing some recording there and trying to get some people to interview for tomorrow's Flux. But until tomorrow, take care, do look after yourselves, and yeah, catch you later.